Welcome to China Forum, where leading experts discuss important topics regarding China and the U.S. China relationship. Thank you for joining us as we continue our series, China Forum, Conversations with Ambassadors. Understanding our past diplomatic relationship with China and learning lessons from the ambassadors who helped shape it are vital for ensuring strong diplomacy and effective China policy in the future. Today, we have the pleasure of being joined by Ambassador Terry Branstad. Ambassador Branstad served as U.S. Ambassador to China from 2017 to 2020. He is also the longest-serving governor in the history of the United States, serving as Iowa's governor from 1983 to 1999, and again from 2011 to 2017. His tenure as ambassador was marked by the Phase 1 trade deal, the successful lobbying of the Chinese government to stem the flow of fentanyl into the United States, and the outbreak of the COVID pandemic, all of which we will discuss further in our interview today. In addition to his role as president of Des Moines University Medical School, his past public service includes election to the office of lieutenant governor and 3 terms in the Iowa House of Representatives. He is a founding partner of the strategic consulting firm Branstad Churchill Group and was named ambassador in residence at Drake University in Des Moines. Welcome, Ambassador Branstad.
Thank you very much. I appreciate this opportunity to have this interview with you from the China Policy Foundation.
We're looking forward to hearing from you. So let's start with before you became the U.S. Ambassador to China. You served as both the 39th and the 42nd governor of Iowa. What were some of your experiences with China as governor?
In my very first year as governor, 1983, I signed a sister state agreement with the Hebei province of China. That's the province that surrounds Beijing. Governor Zhang Zhiguang from Hebei came to Des Moines. We signed the sister state, and he invited me to bring a delegation to Shijiazhuang, the capital of Hebei, in 1984 for their 35th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic. I brought a big delegation of 50 people. We opened a trade office in Hong Kong. We went to Beijing and we rode an old coal-fired steam locomotive from Beijing to Shijiazhuang. We were met in Shijiazhuang. My wife was with me with a band, and they presented my wife with a big bouquet of flowers. We were very warmly welcomed, and we very much enjoyed our trip. And then in the spring of 1985, the very next spring, a small delegation of 5 young men from China came from Hebei province, led by Xi Jinping. He was then just a county level party secretary of one of the counties in Hebei province. But we've been treated so well on our trip to Hebei province, we went all out to make him feel welcome in Iowa in 1985. And the result of that is he has very fond memories as his first trip to America, and he has very fond memories of the people that he met in Iowa in 85, and he calls us all old friends.
What was your impression of Xi Jinping during his visit?
Well, he was a young man in his early 30s. I think he was very thoughtful and very nice. So we had a good experience. I think Donald Trump thinks I knew he was going to be the future leader of China, but that was not the case. But we'd been treated so well on our trip to Hebei that we wanted to go all out and make him feel welcome. And so I appointed Luca Baroni, an Italian immigrant who came to Iowa State, graduated, and went to work for economic development, as the one to take him all over the state. Sarah Landy was in charge of the sister states, and she lived in Muscatine, and she put a home visit together with the Dvorak family in Muscatine, and they visited many farms and factories and got to know. It was right during spring corn planting. They were on the president of the Iowa Corn Growers Farm during corn planting, and so they had a wonderful visit and made a real positive impression on Xi Jinping and his whole delegation.
Can you discuss a little bit the role that individual states like Iowa play in the broader U.S. China relationship?
Yes. I think one of the highlights of the relationship has been the subnational relationship. And I have been to 5 meetings of the American governors meeting with the Chinese provincial governors. And there was a woman named Li Shaolin, who used to head up the Chinese Association for Friendship with Foreign Peoples. And she helped organize those meetings. And those were very helpful. And I think a lot of the progress in the relationship goes back to the sister states that have been developed between American states and Chinese provinces, and the sister city relationships as well. Those build friendships, and friendships can build trust, and that has led to significant trade and other cultural exchanges.
How did this experience and your personal experience meeting Xi Jinping inform your approach to the ambassadorship?
Well, I think that's one of the reasons, probably the primary reason why Donald Trump chose me as ambassador. He knew that I'd had this longstanding relationship with China and with Xi Jinping, and that he calls me an old friend. And because of that, I think he thought that I could be a good representative for the United States of America in the People's Republic of China as ambassador. And it is the most important bilateral relationship that we have in the world. We are the largest economy, and they're the second largest, and we're major trading partners as well.
You assumed the role of U.S. ambassador to China in 2017, directly from serving as governor. What were some of the biggest adjustments you had to make and the differences between those two types of positions?
Well, I love the job as governor, and the governor is, of course, the chief executive of the state. Ambassador, on the other hand, is a diplomatic position where you serve at the pleasure of the President of the United States, and you need to work with the State Department and other agencies. Actually, we had 50 different agencies represented at the embassy.
Oh, wow.
So we had the embassy, and we had 5 consulates when I got there, and that was a big responsibility. But you're not the chief executive. You have to clear things with the president, with the Secretary of State, and sometimes because of the time difference, and it just takes time, that was one of the frustrating things of having to get everything cleared. And sometimes we wanted to respond to something the Chinese did in a very timely way, and it would take 2 or 3 days before we'd get an answer, and that wasn't always ideal.
What were your expectations for your tenure when you assumed your post?
Well, I knew it was the most important bilateral responsibility in the world. I knew that we were facing challenges because of the North Korean nuclear threat and the launching of missiles from North Korea. And so we wanted to work with the Chinese to try to end that, hopefully to see a denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. We also, of course, were very concerned about the fact that China had failed to meet its obligations. We had helped them enter the World Trade Organization, and they had made certain promises in terms of opening up and more reciprocal trade, which had never been fulfilled. So we wanted to deal with that. Also, of course, we were concerned about the fact, and I heard this when I went through confirmation about fentanyl coming from China, which was causing the death of many people in the United States. And we wanted to get the Chinese to address that issue. I'm proud to say that we did get the Chinese to agree to make all of fentanyl a controlled substance. Unfortunately, we still see precursors of fentanyl that are produced in China that go through the cartel in Mexico that are still killing people in the United States. But we did at least get China to make all of fentanyl a controlled substance, and the direct shipment from China has pretty much dried up.
Given some of the difficulties in the relationship, I know the fentanyl negotiations was something that was really important. Can you talk about how that came about and how such a successful deliverable was achieved?
Well, we had a congressional delegation led by Lamar Alexander from Tennessee that came, and I suggested that rather than focusing on trade, that they focus on the fentanyl issue. And they brought that up with all the Chinese leaders they met with. And then I went back to Washington, D.C. and told President Trump that he ought to ask Xi Jinping directly when they met in Buenos Aires at the G7 to make all of fentanyl a controlled substance in China. I made that recommendation. The president made that request, and Xi Jinping relayed that to his people back in Beijing, and they indeed. So that meeting was December 1st, and I think it was on May 1st, they made all of fentanyl a controlled substance. So that's how it worked out.
Oh, wow. Thank you. So discussing more about trade, in 2018, the U.S. China tensions over trade reached a new height. What did the escalating trade war look like on the ground at the embassy in Beijing?
Well, we've been frustrated. The United States had been for many administrations that China had not followed through and opened up and not met their obligations under trade. And so the Trump administration decided to use tariffs for the first time. And that, of course, got the Chinese attention. They were very upset. They retaliated with retaliatory tariffs. And yet at the same time, we had many negotiations, both in Beijing and in Washington, D.C., and even one in Shanghai as we were going along on that. And I want to give Ambassador Lighthizer and Secretary Mnuchin, working with Leo He from the Chinese side, credit for working diligently over a long period of time and being very focused, that eventually led to the phase one trade agreement. For a while, we thought it might even be more inclusive, include addressing the issue of Chinese subsidies of state-owned enterprises. But the Chinese balked at that, and actually negotiations broke off for a while. But eventually, we were able to get the phase one agreement, which made significant improvements, both in the Chinese purchase of agriculture and energy and manufactured goods from the United States, but also in addressing the issue of protecting intellectual property rights and opening up the Chinese for investments in insurance and financial services and things like that. It's not been fully implemented, but big progress has been made. And I know the Chinese have made record purchases of agricultural items, and that's made a real difference for American farmers.
Can you go into a little bit the process and behind the scenes that leads to something like the phase one trade deal and what work the embassy has to do and the coordinating efforts with the Chinese side?
Well, staff at the embassy played a very key role in helping organize the meetings, especially the ones that were held in China. There were ones that were also held in Washington, D.C., which I attended as well. But the key players in that was the President Trump made Ambassador Lighthizer the lead person, but he and Secretary Mnuchin were the key negotiators, and we had staff people from the embassy, and they had staff people, and we had other agencies like agriculture and economic development and commerce that were involved as well. But we went back and forth with these discussions over a period of more than 2 years before we eventually saw the phase one trade agreement signed in January of the year 2020. And I had the honor of being in the White House for that historic signing of that agreement.
And what was the sentiment and the feeling at that signing?
Well, people were very excited about that. We felt this was a significant breakthrough. This is the first time we'd had a really what we considered fair reciprocal agreement with China on trade. It wasn't perfect, but it did address a lot of the issues that we wanted to see addressed. Unfortunately, shortly after that was signed, the COVID pandemic began. And that obviously had an impact on the entire world, and certainly meant that the implementation got off to a slower start than we'd hoped.
Before we talk in more detail about the COVID pandemic, can you talk about a little bit what you think the next steps regarding trade might be, and what the current administration and diplomats should be looking to try to do?
Unfortunately, I think this administration's gotten off to a slow start when it comes to trade. But the recent meeting between President Biden and Xi Jinping, I think, was a good start. And hopefully there will be discussions from that'll lead to hopefully improvements in the trade area. One of the things that could happen would be a reciprocal reduction in tariffs. We have not seen the Chinese implement the commitments they made to purchasing ethanol and DDGs. That would be something that would be helpful to China for their livestock producers, as well as protecting the environment from pollution. They're still using MTBE, which poisons the groundwater, and that's been banned in, I think, every American state for at least 15 years. So that's something they could do, and it would make a lot of sense. And I would hope that that could be part of an agreement. I know the way things work on that is we would probably need to reduce some of our tariffs, and then China would also reciprocate by reducing tariffs on some of those things. So those are the kind of things that I hope can be worked out in the future.
Thank you. So in 2020, you were faced with an unexpected crisis, the COVID-19 outbreak in China. What was your experience like in those early intense days of the pandemic, both as ambassador and simply as a foreign national living through it?
Well, this happened right during the Chinese New Year. Mm-hmm. And my wife and I and friends were on a vacation in New Zealand. And I was in touch with the embassy every day. And they were telling me in January, it is the latter part of January, things are getting worse. And they may close the air travel into China. And so if you don't get back, you won't be able to come back. I'm the chief of mission. And so we cut our vacation short and went directly back to Beijing, and we got in less than a day before they closed down air travel. And then the State Department, because of the problems with COVID, was recommending that we have what they call voluntary departure of those that wanted to leave China, and mandatory departure for any diplomats that had children under age 21. We ended up sending first the people from Wuhan, and then the Wuhan consulate, and then Americans living in Wuhan, and then people from our other consulates and embassy. We sent 1,300 Americans back, more than any other mission in the world, to the United States. And that was quite an undertaking to do that. And I'm proud to say, before I came back in October of 2020, we got those that wanted to back to China with our homecoming task force. But negotiating how that would be done between the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the State Department was not easy.
How long did it take to get everyone evacuated in the first instance?
Well, it took a few months to get everybody that wanted to go back to the United States or need to go back because of the mandatory situation with children under 21. It took a couple of months to do that, and it took, I think, a little bit longer to get them back to China. And when we brought them back to China, the Chinese said, we want them vaccinated, we want them tested before they leave the United States, and then they need to be tested when they arrive. They can't go into Beijing. They have to go into another city. And then anybody that tests positive would have to go into a Chinese hospital, and others would quarantine in a Chinese hotel. The State Department says, no, we will not agree to that. We don't want them to have our DNA. So, and if anybody tests positive, we want them to go back to the United States. We don't want them going into a Chinese hospital. So I negotiated an agreement where they would come in on charter planes. The plane would stay on the ground, and they'd be tested before they left the United States, but then they would be tested at the airport. Anybody that tested positive would be put back on the plane and sent back to the United States. And the others could quarantine in their own residence, if met certain air quality standards, otherwise in a hotel that we agreed upon. But negotiating that between the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the State Department was quite a challenge. We got
Sounds like it.
We got it done, and we got people back. In fact, I had a task force of people from our consulates and embassy. And when we got all those people back, we had a celebration dinner at the ambassador's residence, and we named Nancy, the woman who was in charge of our consulate up in Shenyang, the homecoming queen, and the guy from the embassy who was a co-chair, the homecoming king. So we had a little fun with it, but it was a challenging thing to get through, and I'm proud to say we did get it done.
And in those early days during the quarantine, and as the quarantines and the testing and everything continued, what was it like both helping the embassy staff in Beijing get everything they need and the American citizens abroad getting everything that they need?
Well, I'm very proud to say we had a task force for PPE and medical supplies for America. And I think we had 50 some plane loads of things that we sent back to the United States to meet the needs of hospitals and facilities in the United States that were short of those supplies. So that task force worked out very well. And we worked every day, every work day. And we were down to only 30% of our normal American staff, but we continued to do our responsibilities. And I was there leading the effort. And on weekends, my wife and I would invite members of the staff that was still there, since we were pretty, only about 30% of our normal staff. We'd invite them to have dinner with us. So we got to know them very well. Sometimes we'd go out to dinner at a restaurant in Beijing. Sometimes we'd host them at the ambassador's residence. But it was a way to really show our appreciation for the people that were working so hard to help us during that challenging time.
Another interesting challenge that you faced was the closure of the consulate in Chengdu. Can you speak about that a little bit?
Yeah, this was something that, it started with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo feeling that there was spying going on by the Chinese consulate in Houston. And so he wanted to close that consulate. And he was of the opinion they would just close the consulate in Wuhan. And I tried to say, no, the Chinese will want to close another one of our consulates in Wuhan. Is very small. That's already closed in a sense. They'll close another one. And I was concerned it could be Guangzhou or maybe even Hong Kong. But my political staff person at the embassy says, no, the Chinese will probably close Chengdu because it's comparable in size to the consulate they have in Houston. And that's exactly what they did. And so then I asked the consul general who was there in Chengdu, and he was scheduled, his wife and family were back in the United States, and he was scheduled to go back, but I asked him to stay on and oversee the closing of that. He did, and it was handled in a very professional way.
What goes into closing a consulate?
Well, you need to destroy all the records that could be confidential and that you don't want. And you need to make sure that you take care of, and one of the challenges was the Chinese employees that work for us as the consulate, and trying to make sure that they were going to be treated fairly. And if we could offer them a job at the embassy or the other consulates, that was one of the biggest challenges. Of course, we had to get all the Americans out of the consulate, but then we had a number of Chinese staff that we wanted to make sure that they were treated fairly. And because they had worked for us, we were concerned that they were going to find a difficult time finding other jobs in China.
Were there any other key challenges or achievements from your time as ambassador that you'd like to discuss?
Well, I think one of the big ones was working with the Chinese. And I want to give Nikki Haley, who was our ambassador to the UN, credit to get China and Russia to support the UN security resolutions that put more sanctions on North Korea, and then enforcing those sanctions. I visited Tumen in China, right on the border with North Korea, 3 days after the last nuclear test. And because of the efforts and because of President Trump's personal meetings with the leader of North Korea, we did not see any more nuclear tests. Unfortunately, we've seen more missile launches here recently. We didn't have that for a long time between 2018 and the time that I left, but now North Korea is making more. They're making more threats, and they're doing more missile launches, which is very unfortunate.
What advice do you have for those currently working on the U.S. China relationship?
Well, I think it's important to recognize that we've had a lot of ups and downs in the relationship over the years, and it's a challenging time right now. Certainly, there's very grave concerns about Taiwan and about what happened to the people in Hong Kong. The Chinese had agreed that Hong Kong would be one country, two systems, and they would have freedom of speech and freedom of assembly and independent judiciary. But unfortunately, in the midst of the pandemic, that was all taken away. And so it's created some real problems. And then, of course, the fact that Speaker Nancy Pelosi went to Taiwan has caused a lot of consternation in China, and they have retaliated with certain aggressive actions on the border of Taiwan. And then, of course, we're concerned about the militarization of the South China Sea. And we feel that also presents some real threats to freedom of the seas and to trade through that region. 30% of the world's trade goes through the South China Sea. And the American Navy has done a number of freedom of navigation trips through that area to show that this is international waters, even though the Chinese claim it's theirs. They have what they call the 9-dash line and claim anything within that is Chinese, but it's not. It is international waters, and there's many other countries there in Southeast Asia that depend on that area as well.
What are your hopes for the U.S.-China relationship moving forward?
Well, my hope is that we will recognize that we are the two biggest economies in the world. We're interdependent. The Chinese really, with a growing middle class, need American food, and they appreciate the safety and the quality of American food, and they need the protein from things like pork and beef, chicken, and we Americans also appreciate the quality and the affordability of the Chinese products that we purchase, that American consumers purchase. So I hope that we can work things out in such a way that we can hopefully continue and even expand trade in a way that even though we have differences, political differences, where political systems are very different, and we have some huge philosophical differences, but we still need to recognize that if we can work things out, especially in trade, that can not only benefit our two countries, but the entire world.
Thank you. Do you have any favorite stories or anecdotes about your time as ambassador that you'd like to share?
Well, one of the things that we did was my daughter was teaching at the International School of Beijing. She taught there for 5 years. She's now teaching at an international school in Singapore, but she was there with her husband and 2 granddaughters. And so I wanted to go to every province in China. And one of those provinces was Heilongjiang. The capital is Harbin in the north. And they have something called the Ice Festival in Harbin. They carve these big chunks of ice out of the river, and they make all these things out of ice, big buildings and things like that. So we took our whole family up there, including our granddaughters. They loved this. And they also got the chance to go skiing indoors. Now they have a ski place indoors in Harbin. And of course, it's colder outside than it was in this place. But it's the first time those girls had ever been skiing, and they just loved it. And really, the party secretary in Harbin, in Heilongjiang province, I think, had been a former governor of Hebei. And so he knew me, and they went all out to make us feel, to really show friendliness and hospitality. And so that was a great experience. Another one was, and this took 3 requests to finally get approved, but we went to Tibet. That is a beautiful area, very high elevation. They even had, and we took a train, 22-hour train trip to get to Lhasa, the capital of Tibet. But it was a great experience. We saw the Dalai Lama's Winter Palace and Summer Palace, and we got a chance to learn a lot about the Tibet culture, as well as see the sights in that very exotic area of China.
Thank you. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we end today?
Well, just to say that, I've read about, John Pomfret wrote a book about the beautiful kingdom and the beautiful country and the Middle Kingdom. It's about the whole history from 1776 till about 2016 between the United States and China. A lot of ups and downs in that experience, but I think it's critically important that we recognize the Chinese take the long view of things, and we need to always look at ways that we can try to work out our differences and find the fact that the Chinese people are wonderful people. They have a great work ethic. They're very committed to education of their children, and they're very family oriented. So we need to get to know the Chinese people. We need them to get to know us, and that can build friendships and hopefully trust and better relationship down the road.
We really enjoyed speaking with you today. Thank you again.
Well, you're so welcome. Take care.
Thank you again, Ambassador Branstad, for joining us today. And thank you all for watching. You can view more episodes of China Forum on our YouTube channel and on our website. See you next time on China Forum.